Tampa Bay Estuary Program, and I'm going to talk a little bit about something a little bit different than our previous two speakers have talked about, and that is incorporating some economic valuation tools into how we communicate with the public about our science and management, and just the assessment of ecosystem health. I think one of the things that we have found is that sometimes it is very difficult for us to reach different audiences when we're not talking the language that they want to hear and are interested in. And so you'll see a little bit about some of the new techniques and tools that we're using in Tampa Bay here. This was Tampa Bay in the 1970s. It was very highly polluted with excess nutrients. This is just a covering of ulva over the top of most of the shallow portions of Tampa Bay. In fact, it was considered dead by many of the both national and regional media outlets, and really caused a very significant reaction from the public that lived here in Tampa Bay to do something about the bay itself. There are anecdotal information that people that lived along the bays, their silver actually tarnished because of some of the hydrogen sulfide and other materials that were coming off of the rotting algae around Tampa Bay. Between the 1950s and the 1980s, about half of Tampa Bay seagrasses were lost. We've lost half of our natural shoreline, 40% of our tidal marshes. The white ibis populations and fish kills were common. Visibility was reduced to about 2 feet in Hillsborough Bay, which is the eastern lobe of Tampa Bay. And to put that in perspective, visibility is now typically around 14 feet. So we've seen a tremendous recovery in the bay. One of the first goals that the elected officials associated with the Tampa Bay Estuary Program did was to set a seagrass restoration goal of recovering seagrass to the acres observed in 1950. So that we'd lost about 50% of our shoreline, of our seagrass between 1950 and 1990. The map on the left here shows where we had seagrass in 1950 and did not in 1990. So you can see that throughout Tampa Bay, we had lost a lot of seagrasses, primarily due to excess nitrogen, excess algae associated with nitrogen that fueled that algae, and blocking of the sunlight. And the grasses were retreating toward the shoreline during this period. The estuary program and a lot of partners, many of you in the audience today, have gone through a very significant series of science-based efforts to develop specific numeric targets for Tampa Bay's recovery, starting off with the seagrass growth and reproduction goal of restoring seagrass to acreage observed in 1950. Then took a look at seagrass light requirements, some work that Mote Marine Lab did, indicating that seagrasses in Tampa Bay need about 22.5% light that hits the surface of the water down to where the grass blades are. So this light requirement, we now have a numeric goal for light requirements of seagrasses in Tampa Bay. We took a look at light attenuation factors and found that chlorophyll was one of the major light attenuation factors, along with CDOM and turbidity, and certainly in some areas, but chlorophyll was because its relationship with nitrogen loading was something that could be managed over time. So we have a light attenuation goal, again, associated with reaching that 22.5% light at the deep edge of the grass beds. Then through a series of mechanistic and empirical models, we're able to relate this light attenuation goal to specific chlorophyll A concentrations. They're different for different parts of the bay. But they range from around 4 micrograms per liter in the lower part of the bay to about 12 in the upper part. So again, that chlorophyll concentration allowed us to reach the light attenuation goal, the seagrass light requirement, and the seagrass growth and reproduction goal. And then again, through a series of models, we're able to relate chlorophyll A concentration, that goal, to a very specific total nitrogen loading goal. This is external loads. We are working primarily with external loads here in Tampa Bay. And so we have a TN load goal that now is also the regulatory total maximum daily load for Tampa Bay. And it's about 1,400 tons per year that, again, will result in meeting those chlorophyll and light attenuation goals. When the elected officials on our policy board realized that it was going to be very difficult to meet that total nitrogen load target by themselves, they approached private partners throughout the watershed. We're a very industrialized area. We have quite a bit of agriculture in the eastern part of our watershed, as well as mining. And we now have a Tampa Bay Nitrogen Management Consortium that consists of about 45 public and private partners throughout the watershed, which are meeting regulatory water quality goals by enacting over 500 projects and actions over the last 20 years, and also agreeing to voluntary caps on nitrogen loads at 2003 to 2007. So that means any additional load coming into Tampa Bay needs to be compensated for a project that reduces a similar amount of load to Tampa Bay. With this public-private partnership in place, we have seen a big reduction in nitrogen load. In fact, now Tampa Bay's external nitrogen load is about half of what it was in the 1970s. A big reduction from point sources. We heard a little bit about this from Indian River Lagoon to begin with, but a continuing reduction over time. And this is at the same time we've seen about 2 million additional people in the watershed. So even though we have seen a reduction in nitrogen load, at the same time we've seen a big increases in population. Water quality has improved over time. Starting in 1974, the 4 major bay segments of Tampa Bay. Red is when we were not meeting that light attenuation goal and the chlorophyll A concentration threshold, and green indicates years when we are. This is an average annual. You can see with the reductions in wastewater, it took about 5 years before we started seeing improvements in water quality in Tampa Bay. Statewide stormwater regulations were enacted in the mid-1980s, again, a little while before we started seeing improvements. These years here were El Nino years, when we had a lot of additional nitrogen coming into the bay, as well as a lot of CDOM and fresh water, and we're not meeting water quality targets during those years, and have seen a gradual increase in water quality over time. We still are dealing with issues in Old Tampa Bay and are looking at several different options there. And of course, the bottom line is, how are your seagrasses doing? Our recovery goal, again, was that about 38,000 acres. In 2014, we met that goal and are continuing to see an increase in seagrass through 2016. Sort of put this in perspective, when we set that goal in 1991. I was the scientist of the program at the time, and our projection was that we might meet our goal in about 2035 at that time. And so we've seen, this is the El Nino year when we lost seagrass, but we have seen a great increase in seagrass since then. But we are all very aware of what can happen with that Indian River Lagoon graphic that we saw in the last time, that we certainly need to be continuing to implement projects that manage our nitrogen load to Tampa Bay. So this is great, and we received quite a bit of international and national attention from our colleagues, our scientific and management colleagues. For clearer water and more seagrasses, it's great news for fish, wildlife, and users of the bay. So what's the big deal for the other 50% of the people living in our watershed? And this is an attempt to try to meet and inform people that are not especially interested in this good news with some other good news, and that is when we brought in the economic valuation metrics in addition to our environmental and water quality metrics. This is a cover story from the Tampa Bay Business Journal, this is the first time we've ever had something from the Business Journal that really recognizes how important clean water is to our economy. This is work that was done by the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council that found out that the fact that we now have a healthy bay, not just the fact that there's a bay here, but the bay is healthy, that added value results in about 1 out of every 5 jobs in the watershed is dependent on a healthy bay, which translates to about 13% of the economy in the Bay Area. Again, another way of reaching realtors, Chamber of Commerce, many people that we have not been able to reach in the past. We've also taken a look at ecosystem services and the nitrogen removal, the seagrass goal, the fact that we're now meeting that seagrass goal through primarily denitrification results in a replacement value of about $26.4 million per year, or when you put it into sort of perspective, that has precluded the need for a new medium-sized wastewater treatment plant. Again, a different way of talking about how important a clean ecosystem is and those services that go along with healthy seagrass systems. And finally, looking also at blue carbon benefits of meeting the seagrass goal. The seagrasses are quite good at removing carbon, and it results in about $1.6 million per year, putting that again into another way of communicating the importance of a healthy bay, or of about 1,500 automobile carbon footprint per year with the additional seagrass that has been gained over the years due to that nitrogen reduction strategy. So, sort of a bottom line here, the target resources identified by both public and scientists as worthy indicators early on, that seagrasses were a worthy indicator to work together to address. I think I can't overestimate how the collective efforts of everyone around Tampa Bay, the public sector, the private sector, academics, working together toward common goals has been critical here. Science-based numeric goals and targets been very important. Multiple tools, long-term monitoring, and we've talked a little bit about that earlier, how important it is to have a monitoring program in place that allows you not to just to see where you've been, but where you're going and how to make changes along the way through adjustment and assessment. And finally, this link to economic value has allowed us to talk to different audiences about the importance of healthy ecosystems in terms of the economic value of the bay. And I think a really important message is that a healthy economy and a healthy environment go hand in hand, and they're not necessarily at all adverse. Very quick overview of Tampa Bay, and sounds like I have time for a couple questions. Jim.
So, Holly, you've actually picked like the 2 easiest economic valuations to do. Have you worked any on real estate values as a function of an increased health of the bay, and are they large?
They are large. Part of the economic valuation that was done by the Regional Planning Council looked at the value of bayshore homes versus those just a quarter of a mile inland of similar size, and found that the premium for the bayshore was about a fourth more. Now, if you'd looked at that in the 1970s, it would have been the opposite way because of the condition of the bay at the time. So that's been an important piece. And again, has been important for us to talk with the realtor groups in the Bay Area about how important a healthy economy and environment is. Yes, sir.
Have you been able to separate the importance of long-term monitoring and achieving those results?
That's a really good question. That stoplight graphic has been a really important tool for us to translate how we're doing overall to the public as well as to the management community. We do not have an economic element of that, but without a doubt, I think the fact that we can show that we're progressing or not over time is a critical element of the overall strategy.
Thank you, because it's very interesting that for next year, EPA is cutting the funding for water quality and benthic monitoring in the Florida Keys National Marine Center.
Yeah, I think without knowing where you are and whether you're, progressing or regressing is critical to the overall strategy. Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah,
Was
Gene.
most of the dredging, nearshore dredging, in Tampa Bay done in the 50s?
It was done up to about the end of the 70s for the finger fill canals. A lot of it was done early on, but the dredging continued to about the end of the 70s. The majority of it. We still have dredging for ship maintenance, ship channel maintenance, and that is ongoing. But in terms of new dredging for land building, that is very, very uncommon now. Yes, sir.
Did part of the change come from change in agrarian practices, which, this is a big orange growing area in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and it's totally shifted away from that now. Is part of that change in land use practice change what you see in the Bay?
Yeah, that is part of it. We have never been as agricultural dominated as many other systems are. Never. That's never is. Since the 1950s, we've been quite more and more urbanized. Interestingly enough, the way the agricultural systems have reduced their nitrogen, the remaining ones, are due primarily to water conservation issues. And so as they have had to restrict the amount of water they use, they also are restricting the amount of runoff and nutrients associated with that runoff. So we have seen an increase in water management practices that have resulted in reductions from agricultural systems too, in terms of nitrogen and phosphorus. Okay,
One
good.
quick question.
Yep.
I mean, around the state, we're always hearing about the muck. We just heard about it in
Mm-hmm.
Tampa Bay, and the Keys canals you're hearing about. So where's the muck here? I mean,
Yeah.
certainly the number of people living in this area, the amount of, whether it's soil or artificial turf or nitrogen, this will all be high. So why don't we have more muck here?
Yeah. There was actually quite a bit of muck in Hillsborough Bay, and in fact, the whole area went anoxic almost every summer because of the very large muck layer. As we have seen improvements in water quality over time, we have seen a reduction in the muck distribution, and so it is primarily now confined to the deeper areas within Hillsborough Bay. But that was there. Although we don't have specific data for sediment flux back in the old days, it appears that sediment flux and the amount of muck associated with it has been reduced significantly with improvements in water quality over time. Again, it's a long process. It's not as quick as dredging, but it has been an effective process here.
The surface area of those deeper areas is small relative to the area of the bay.
Yeah, that's right.
Remobilized.
Yeah. Bob.
So along with seagrasses, where do you see the priorities of the estuary program going over the next decade?
Certainly the habitats are very important. One of the things that we are looking at now is how do we incorporate climate change into our long-term targets? Because our long-term targets may no longer be appropriate as we're looking at climate change impacts. For instance, some of our marsh and mangrove may be squeezed out over time. Are there ways to incorporate some of buffer areas into our marsh and mangroves areas? So we're sort of moving up slope a little bit. Certainly water quality will continue to be a major issue as we continue to grow here, and with that cap on nitrogen, how do we continue to maintain maintain water quality in Tampa Bay? But we're at the point now with seagrass and water quality where we're in a maintenance area, so we're looking more at coastal habitats. Okay, good. Well, thank you.
Over here,
One more. Okay.
in the back. Well, human well-being is a concept that you hear about more and more. And now that you've been very successful, well, the SRA programs are very successful in measuring environmental improvements in the Bay. They start to be associated how the Bay improves with economic indicators. Do you see yourself down the road that the SRA program would be interested in measuring human well-being and how human well-being is associated with improvements in the Bay?
That probably is not a primary focus area of the estuary program, but the policy board could decide to go in that direction. So, that really is it has not been up to this point, although there's a close relationship there, obviously.
Kind of an evolution. You measure the metrics for the environment, and the first thing we got to associate it with humans, and the first thing that comes to people's mind is economic metrics.
Yeah.
And it goes into the well-being.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that we become more and more meshed with that as we go along. Good. Thank you.